few weeks so what we're talking about is in Mark chapter 4. He gives a parable of the sower, and the parable of the sower, is like all these different seeds land on different soils. And one of the things that changed me about that parable was when I had a friend sitting on my couch that said, "What if I'm just bad soil?" And I kind of thought to myself, I'm like, how many people are reading this parable with that lens? And then I kind of thought, like, well, what if that is some of the intention behind it? And that's me growing up in a Christian house and a Christian family, I never even saw it with that lens. That's why having different perspectives is so important, because it can open up the scriptures to you. And so I'm listening to, so I'm start watching, kind of reading around it, and then you start seeing how Jesus keeps making bad soil good. So there's the story about, you have the things about the kingdom of God. So it's like a mustard seed. You don't want to hide it under a bushel. No, you're going to let it shine. And then you have Jesus calming the storm and everything that went with that. And we saw that water, that storm was bad soil, and Jesus made bad soil good. And then we had what we talked about last week with the guy filled with all the demons, and he was then healed of all the demons. And Jesus, the weird thing there was Jesus, he wanted to follow Jesus. He was like, nope, stay in your own town. And everyone was kind of amazed and listened to him. But I think that a guy filled with demons was bad soil, and Jesus turned bad soil into good. And so now we have the story right after that. And it's kind of a twofer story. So we'll read the first part and kind of go through it, and then we'll read the second part, spend more time with that, and then we kind of go back into the first one again in our reading. So we kind of need to kind of remember that. So Jesus, we're in Mark chapter 5, beginning with verse 21. And so Jesus, he heals this guy of all the demons, and then this happens. When Jesus had again crossed over by the boat to the other side of the lake. Now, does it sound like a lot of time has passed? That's important. Like, all these stories are rapid fire, like pop, 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 which I think that's Mark's cue into us. It's like, hey, keep on reading. Like these stories are connected. So when we go back to the other side, we're going back into a Jewish area again. So we spent time out in the Gerasenes, which is a Gentile area, which means just other nations besides Israel. And so now he's come back into a Jewish region again. So get back to the other side of the lake. A large crowd had gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. All right. So who is this guy? Who is Jairus? What does he do? See it right up there? He's a synagogue leader. Like so he is, like, when you start hearing them talk about the scribes and the Pharisees, he's kind of in that bunch. So the rubber is meeting the road now. And he goes and bows down before Jesus. Nothing is healing his daughter. He needs to see Jesus here. So he's like, my daughter is dying. So it's a big deal that this guy is doing doing this. So it says, so Jesus went with him. And so that's kind of the end of that first service. So we have this synagogue leader that comes up to Jesus, bows before him, which is a huge deal. I mean, this is this massive, scandalous thing that this guy is doing this because his daughter is dying and he wants Jesus to heal him. And so Jesus is like, yeah, I'll go with you. So Jesus went with him. All right, on to story number 2. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years.
Ouch.
She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting any better, she only grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. And immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. And at once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him, and he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples said, "and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" And Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing that it had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus. Oh, all right. Stopping there. Okay, so that story about the woman, what are details that kind of stick out to you guys that you think are kind of interesting? Anything at all? Yeah, Jack.
Well, the one thing is that she felt that just by touching his clothing,
Yeah,
that she was going to be healed.
yeah,
I saw that as an act of faith, though, just as well,
yeah,
just like with the
Yeah.
first story.
yeah,
He came to Jesus with an act of by an act of faith because he knew what Jesus was all about. So there's a commonality between the two.
and also
And that
I hear mustard seeds language in that.
Yep.
That normally, like clothing, it's like, oh, I want to actually touch the person. I don't know if any of you have seen that video of a woman like grabbed Pope John Paul like 6 months ago, and like she wouldn't let go of him, and he finally kind of had to throw her hand off of him. I don't know. It's kind of a weird video. It makes sense though. Like it's Corona, and like this woman is like grabbing him, and so like a lot of times like we want to do that, but she's just like what Jack is saying, kind of going after the cloak, and that sounds very much like mustard seeds, like almost inconsequential. It's just garments, and that's so. Yeah, that's an interesting. I'm not even sure I've thought about that before. I understand the cloak is kind of thing, but yeah, that's good. That's good. Anything else stand out to you? So the big one is her bleeding. Is her bleeding? That's the big one. Let's see. So, and here's the thing with that. So how long was she bleeding? For 12 years. That's also an important number. That's a long time, but it's a suspiciously long time. And the reason why I say suspiciously long time, because 12 is important. 12 is one of those numbers that means all. Like all, like 12 tribes of Israel, 12 disciples, like the 144,000 at the end of all time, all the believers, is 12 times 12, right? Like that's 12 times 12. It means all, like in kind of biblical numerology kind of stuff, 12 means all. So she's bleeding for all the years. Like all, it's there. Like, so 12, yeah, that is a definite time frame. But when you look at that, you see that the story is telling kind of a deeper message than just, oh yeah, it happened for 36 minutes or something like that. Like it's saying something even more important, that it's all the years, and it's kind of cueing us into how God is working. But her bleeding is also what's important here, because, and I talk about this a lot, because it's when I was little, because no one actually likes to talk about women bodily functions. Like I always thought, like, oh man, she had like a sore and it was just constant. Like I pick off scabs and they bleed, type of things like that. But no, this is like her, like she's on her menstrual period constantly.
My mother always said that when I happened to me.
And so if you're on that constantly, that is as awful as that would be, just if that person is just living. It's especially bad in Jewish understanding that it means that she's unclean, and she could never be clean because it never stops. And so no matter, so she's trying to stop this. So this thing is inhibiting her from ever being close to God as well. And I think it's interesting that 12 years is connected to it. So it's like this person is just separate. Even though she's Jewish and all of that stuff, she's just separate and outside. And so she's desperate. And then Jesus comes along and she says, what Jack pointed out, if I can just touch like the tassels, if I could just touch the hem of the cloak, then perhaps I can be healed, right? Like that's it's over there. The way I describe it is, if you're a woman in first century Judaism and you are your menstrual period is never stopping and it's going for 12 years, I would say that that's bad soil. That is the definition of bad soil. Let's see here. I'm looking at my note in the bottom of it, seeing if I missed something. It also says a woman with her condition could not go to the temple or the synagogue and was ordinarily confined to a single room of the home. People would have avoided all physical contact with her and anything she touched. This was a kind of a social death as well. And Jesus literally gave life back to her. He restored her physical wholeness and her sense of belonging. And so we see, like, she gets everything back there from him, that Jesus literally turned that bad soil into good. I don't know, does anyone have any thoughts on that one? Okay, so remember, the previous story is that Jesus, the synagogue leader, comes up to Jesus and says, my daughter's dying. Can you come, Jesus? Oh, I forgot to mention the part where Jesus says, somebody touched me. And I could just imagine you're just walking in a crowd of people, and just is everything around. It's the most absurd thing. Like, geez, somebody touched me. And the disciples are like, stop being ridiculous, Jesus. Like that. Stop doing this. And he's like, no, somebody touched me. And it says that her faith made her well. She's like, ooh, I did it. And he says that her faith made her well, which I think is kind of further connection with that mustard seed idea, that it looks like it's inconsequential and all of that stuff, but the kingdom of God is things of small things and mustard seeds. And okay, so and Jesus says to her, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. All right, so continuing on with verse 35. While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader, and said, your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore? And it's obvious that what has kind of happened here, that Jesus is not in a big rush to go help this guy. Like that's he's probably, and the guy's probably like, come on, and she died, and now Like, don't bother here, don't bother him anymore. And this is verse 36, overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, don't be afraid, just believe. Kind of connecting to that previous story just a little bit there. And he did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, and the brother of James. When they came into the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw the commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. Most likely what that was is back in the day, they would hire professional mourners that would go in there, and basically their job is to make a huge commotion about someone dying to hide the actual grief of the family, so that people wouldn't stare at the family grieving and things like that. Like we do the exact opposite today. We tell people, they're like, ooh, your father died. Yeah, that's not good. Yeah, so the funeral's tomorrow. Okay, yeah, right, you'll be in work the next day. Like that's how we treat it today. We're like, we expect people to bury it right then. The opposite was the case of the fact then. We expect people to hide their own suffering right now. Back then, these professional mourners would be hired to hide suffering. So, yeah.
One thing I noticed one time, if you think about down in New Orleans, down there, when
Yeah.
they have funerals, they all come out grieving, and they're all sorrowful for the death of the person.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, like a light switch goes on, and they turn and they celebrate.
Yeah.
So I mean, they got the right idea in that point, because
Yeah.
really, you don't want to have, sorrowful. You granted, as humans, you feel sorrowful for the death of a person,
Yeah.
but on the other side, you need to rejoice because they are where they need to be with their Lord.
Mm-hmm.
It's a celebration of life and a new life.
Yeah.
Which, I know I'm going to be the first person to tell you I'm not going to make it to that when Mom goes,
Yeah.
when she gets called home.
Mm-hmm.
That part of it I'm going to have a hard time with.
So yeah. So you guys know I have weird views on things. All my weird views are 100% correct, though. Like that, you guys need to understand that. Like that.
That's one of the weirdest views.
Yeah. So like the funeral stuff with people. So I always am concerned about how I word this. I think any theology or practice, theology is just practice about God type of thing. Any theology or practice that says death is the answer, I'm not a fan of, and that happens a lot in Christianity, where we kind of view someone as dying, and then now they're everything is better now, and I think that is a way of trying to mitigate our own sufferings, because that's not what the person was created to do. The person wasn't created to live in this world and die. That's the deaths that we experience with our loved ones are we are staring our sinfulness in the face when we come to grips with the loss of a loved one. But we have hope that just as Jesus rose, we will rise, and we will rise. And we also have hope that even when our loved ones are facing death, that they will never be lost or forsaken, and that they will be with Jesus. And so we can celebrate that they are with Jesus, but that's And that's good. And, and sometimes there's a lot of pain, and, there could almost be some relief, that's just like, all that stuff. Like, I get all of that, but like, I for a good chunk of my life, everyone that I was around me, they were almost trying to hide their suffering. And I really appreciate how you said that, Jack, that you said, I'm going to have a hard time with that.
Yeah, we it is because where she is in her age and her
Yeah,
health and everything.
yeah,
So mom's been talking to Pat and I almost all the time now. Says, I don't want you grieving over me.
yeah,
She said, I want you to go out and have a party, rejoice.
Yeah.
I have a full life.
mhm,
I've done everything I could possibly have done,
yeah,
and now it's time, I check up,
Mhm.
be home with Dad. And I said, yeah, I know, but we, we as humans
yeah. Well,
we have a hard time with that sometimes.
and I think, well, you notice that a lot of my theology that I talk about is deep feeling, kind of comes from deep feelings that we all feel. So I make fun of like the evilness of the water and how we swim, and there's kind of something innate in us that we don't try to get our toes as deep as we can. I think there's a deep feeling of the evilness of the deep type of thing in there. And I think when we face death, there's a deep feeling there too, that I think we have to pay attention to, where when we lose a loved one, it's almost like part of us is just, it's almost fractured. And I think if our goal in a funeral is just to go, oh, everything's so much better for them now, I think it's denying that fracturing inside of us. And it's almost saying that death, the problem that the resurrection is going to correct, has solved the problem. And so I I don't think death solves problems. I think life does. I think resurrection does. And we are looking forward to the day when Jesus will wipe every tear from every eye. All of that stuff. So what my biggest message, for those of you who've been to enough of my funerals now, I only have like 2 sermons that I do, and I kind of adjust them. I'm giving away the game right now. But I have one big idea, and that's as Paul in Ephesians says, grieve, but grieve with hope. Don't grieve like all the other nations do, but grieve with hope. And I think that's a good way that we can celebrate the life of your mom, that yeah, there's a fracturing that has happened of a loved one, but we have hope that they are with Jesus and that we will see each other again real soon, whatever that means, and when that time, when all the tears will be wiped away, and all of those things. So it's so that's kind of how I view it. And that's kind of a key to have this. And I really liked how you said that with, like, I'm going to have problems doing that, celebrating. And I think that's an important part of how we grieve, where it's like, no, this feels wrong. I'm sad. And it's okay to be sad. Be sad with hope, like that's, and laugh and talk about stories about the time she did something ridiculous, and tell all those stories. That's all part of the grieving process. But I was extremely close to my grandparents that died 2 Christmases ago, and that's not a part of me that's fixed, but it's a part of a hope of the future, so I think that as we go into the rest of this, I think you'll kind of understand kind of where I'm coming from and why I call this bad soil then, because we'll keep on going through here. So where are we? So we're talking about all the professional mourners and all of that stuff. And then Jesus says at the end of verse 39, the child is not dead, but asleep. And they all laughed at him for saying ridiculous stuff. You know, there's all this commotion, and that's like when you got to put yourself into the story. I think when Jesus is walking in, I think many times we think about Jesus walking in and it's dead quiet as everyone is watching with bated breath. What is Jesus going to do? But there's all this wailing and moaning, and then Jesus says something ridiculous, and they're now all the wailing and moaners are all laughing at him. There's all of this chaos and noise all around him. So he kicks them all out. So verse 40, they all laughed at him, and he kicked them all out. And he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. And he took her by the hand and said, Talitha nume, which means, little girl, I say, get up. And immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old, again with the 12, right? Which also matters for, that's like bat mitzvah stuff, and like she's becoming a woman. Like, this is a hugely cynical view of this, and I used to really stand on this argument. I don't as much anymore. I don't as much anymore, but children back in the day were not given as much credit as they are now. You know, we're kind of, in our culture right now, we're all kind of little children worshipers. Like we just are. And you can tell by how the churches do everything right now. Like, everything is child. And it's because they're just setting up what we worship. And so that's not how things used to be. And at 12 years old, she could finally demand a dowry for the family. So she's able to make money now, and here she's dying. It's a very cynical way of viewing it, but that is definitely part of us, okay? Also, it's curious about how long the woman was bleeding with how old the girl is. Again, we have all these good biblical numbers going on here. There's all kinds of stuff. Oh, there's this layer upon layer upon layer upon layer on these stories. It's really clever writing. It's clever storytelling. It's clever just the way that all this is playing out. It's all just clever, and we need to pay attention to the cleverness. And so. So immediately the girl shows up. She's 12 years old. Everyone's completely astonished. At this, they were all completely astonished, and he gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this, and told them to give her something to eat. That something to eat is very important there. That kind of means that she's not a ghost. You know, like that she is alive. We see this playing out in Jesus' resurrection narratives, not in Mark. Mark doesn't do anything with this, but in the other Gospels, this plays in that Jesus is usually eating something after he rises from the dead. And so it's kind of, the authors are saying, yeah, he's not a ghost. He's eating things, because we all know what happens when Casper eats something. He just goes right through to the floor, right? Like that's what happens. Yeah, Jack.
Chris, to your point, Jesus did. What was the one question Jesus asked the disciples when he met up with them after his resurrection?
Yeah. Do you have something to
You
eat?
got something to eat?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm hungry.
yeah, I'm hungry. Like that's, and I think that's eating is very humanizing. It's very realizing. And so, like, yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. So with this girl being dead, and then Jesus raising her from the dead, which all of this is picturing future resurrection stuff, right here at kind of the end of this section, and he it's a dead girl. So if you look at death, kind of like how I'm looking at it, kind of how we talked about it. that death is the evidence of our sin. You know, that's Pauline. The wages of sin is death, right? The wages of sin, death does not mean righteousness, right? Like that. So the wages of sin is death. And so death means that there's a separation, that there's, you know, all these things. And Jesus now comes and brings life into that. I think it's the very essence of that death being bad soil, and Jesus making that bad soil good. And so I think all three of these then are all about how Jesus is making bad soil. And what this helps me out with, and this, I got to decide, I'm still working this little bit out, so this opinion may change of mine. But I think the Gospels, this is how I think, I kind of revealed my hand actually in the sermon from last week with the going up the mountain to where, and seeing that, you know, the stars where Jesus and that mountain is difficult. I think the Gospels all bring us on a journey where we're going through and we get to kind of the passion narrative of Jesus. And I think if we just read through the Gospels, I don't think we'll feel good about ourselves when we read the Gospels. I think if you read small little chunks of it, you're like, oh yeah, there's all kinds of good news and all this stuff. But I think you get through it and you're like, I don't know, this is a huge price I have to pay. Like there is, for this kind of righteousness, I don't know if I can live up to it. And I could be wrong about this, in all seriousness. This is what I'm studying right now. But I think it's that the Gospels are leading us through a time when we just read through them where it's like, this is difficult. I don't know if I can live up to this. And we get to the point where we climb the mountain, to use the language from the sermon list, climb the mountain of Calvary, and we find out then that Jesus is actually taking the cross for us. And then that there is a resurrection. And so the Gospels are actually a very difficult road that suddenly we see enacted in Jesus at the end. Now, this is all a very new idea. Yeah, Jack.
Yeah, you know, Jesus several times in his ministry pointed out the sacrifices you have to make to follow him.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, his point about, you know, picking up your cross and taking up your cross and following me,
Yeah.
it meant a tremendous amount of sacrifice. And they had to know at one point granted, they really didn't know the full story until Pentecost.
Yeah.
But they had to know that they were going to get suffering. Suffering was going to happen that they were not going to be in favor of. His disciples, the people that were following him.
Yeah.
I mean, even the story about the rich man that said, you know,
We're coming up on that.
The 10 Commandments, I follow every one of them. It says, but you need to give up what you got in order to follow me. You know, give up your money, give it to the poor and everything. And look what happened to him. So I mean, it's one thing that we learn. Granted, it's a tough road to follow. But in order to achieve the ultimate goal, you know, and know what's on the other side, and we all do know at this point what it is. It seems to me like I'd rather take that road than take this one down here.
And what I'm saying right now isn't fleshed out. And it's not 100% perfect. Like this is the Bible, especially the Gospels, all four of them are good, clever writing. We're seeing that in here, like in the stories that are in them and all of that stuff. It's if it wasn't good, we wouldn't be reading it. Okay, today. Nothing that's garbage lasts as long as this lasts. Okay, that's just I think we take the Bible for granted sometimes, that the stories in it are like, oh well, I guess, you know, like that's there were thousands of gospels written about Jesus at the time, and these were the ones that kept getting spread around. Many times our English translations will neuter the mess out of the stories. But yeah, so it's important for us to, it's important to read and not skip over the difficult bits. Because I think it's like, yeah, right, Jesus, stick it to the man type of thing like that. But then sometimes you're like, oh man, well, maybe sometimes I'm the man. Like that. Maybe sometimes me or all of us as white Christian Americans and all of that stuff, and that we might be some that are enacting a pound of flesh out of others. And we may have more in common with the Pharisees, or we are looking for cheap grace in places, like that's, or we are, it's hard to get through the gospels unscathed. But what we see is even us who have struggled getting gospels unscathed, we see that Jesus is turning bad soil into good that entire time, like and I think that's the important thing, and that's a gospel good news message. And yeah, does anything, before we go on to the next story, does anyone have anything in their heart that they would like to say? All right, let's continue on. Chapter 6. So Jesus left there and went to his hometown, accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were amazed. Where did this man get these things? They asked. What's this wisdom that has been given to him? What are these remarkable miracles he is performing? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us? And they took offense at him. And Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his own town, among his relatives and in his own home. He could not do any miracles there except lay hands on a few sick people and heal them. He was amazed at their lack of faith. This is such an odd section. This is such an odd section. But it's also connected to that woman that's sick, right? And Jairus, like over there, like this odd little section of scripture here. Jesus wasn't able to do any miracles there. What an odd little section. They were like, this guy is all this, he does all this amazing teaching, and like, but he grew up just down the street. I saw him do this one time, I saw this happen. I saw that happen. It's the same reason why I think my family likes Coley more than they like me. They know where all the bodies are buried with me. Yeah, like that. They don't know where they all are with Coley, right? And so, but I think it's really interesting that it's like that prophet is without honor in his hometown. That he wasn't able to do any miracles there. And I think what it's doing there is it's kind of almost establishing this sense of faith of the community, kind of being able to work together almost. It says it's like he was able to lay hands and heal just a few sick people. It's important not to make too much out of just one little story, but it is like an interesting, Jesus is doing all of this amazing work, all this amazing stuff throughout all these towns, turning bad soil into good, to be using my language. And then all of a sudden, it's almost like the brakes get hit. The brakes get hit. And I think that's kind of the purpose of this story. That
yeah, I like this one sentence or two from the commentary that I've got here, that People's Bible commentary.
Yeah.
And he really kind of spells it out here. I know I lost my place. Oh, in a certain sense, This incident was important training for the disciples who shortly would be proclaiming the gospel themselves and also facing rebirth.
Yeah.
I mean, so they're going through a transition right now with this what they're getting from Jesus and his healings and his teachings and his preachings.
Yeah.
That's going
Uh-oh.
to change these things. I said, they did the same to our master. So they're going to feel the stuff that Jesus is feeling as they start going through their.
Yeah. Talk to everyone. I forgot
So,
to
I
do
mean,
something.
they're going through the same transition that an understanding from their point. Oh, he's got no signal. But there was nothing in here I wanted to mention, then I lost my place on it. Let me find it. Oh, can anybody hear me on the other end, or is it just their signal?
So, sorry, everyone. I forgot to plug my computer in, and
Bad boy.
I know,
It died.
and it died. So
The other point in here that I skipped over it. It said they were not ready to accept. I said to what I think. Oh, hold on a second. What should I say? We're over here. Oh, here it is. Here's the sentence I was looking for. The worshipers all that day were all people who knew him well. Okay? And then he goes on to say he had now come to share the gospel with them, but they were not ready to receive him as the one who embodied the gospel. So see, they were not even, I mean, the disciples had their own transition going on with their training and everything, but the people themselves were not ready to receive him, as the gospel, as the Messiah who was there to save them from all of this, this evil that's going on in the world.
Yeah.
So I kind of like that as a that's what it is.
So when we look at the bigger picture, so the important thing is it's all these layers and layers and layers and layers on top of this story. So we started off with talking about the parable of the sower, right? Parable of the sower. And then we see all these things, all this stuff about the kingdom of God, hide it under a bushel, mustard seeds. Then we get into these stories about Jesus turning bad soil into good. And then what do we see here? Well, all of a sudden, it almost seems like we see some bad soil here for a second, right? You see some bad soil again with his family, saying a prophet's without honor in his hometown and all that stuff. And I think, Lee and G want to join. How long have they been there? They just popped up, right? Yeah. I'm trying to look at my watch.
Just the last 10 minutes.
Yeah. That's the so I think this theme is kind of going through, and this is a theme that Paul really works out. Like when you read Romans 9 and 10, Paul is really struggling with this idea of what it means to be the people of God, but how it almost looks like the promise has moved from them now. So how are they still part of the promise? And that's where all the language is like, you Gentiles that believe now, you are just grafted in. I think this right here is kind of dealing with that same thing, that Jesus is turning bad soil into good, but we see some people still pushing away from that, right? And then here's how I think the section ends with the very next story. Lee, we are chapter 6, verse 6. Kind of.
Okay.
So he was amazed at their lack of faith, and then Jesus went around teaching from village to village, calling the 12 to him. Again, another 12. That's all. This is important numbers here. And he began to send them out 2 by 2 and give them authority over impure spirits. And these were his instructions: take nothing for the journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in your belts. Wear sandals, but not an extra shirt. Whenever you enter a house, stay there until you leave that town. And if any place will not welcome you or listen to you, leave that place and shake the dust off your feet. Basically, take nothing from that town with you. Don't listen to the negative Nancy's out there. Dust off your feet as a testimony against them. And they went out and preached that people should repent, and they drove out many demons and anointed many sick people with oil and healed them. So I think that's the capstone of this section here, is that this begins with seeds, right? Seeds being spread onto soil. And we see that many people are we're talking about kingdom of God and like there's all these different types of soil, but we see that Jesus has the ability to turn bad soil into good. So calming of the storm, exorcising all the demons out of the guy with the legion of demons in him, the woman with the bleeding problem, and then the dead girl. Jesus is able that, but we still see that there is difficult soil still in here. And now the disciples are going with the sower. Like I think it's this beautiful arc that comes through. And so I think what it helps us see that as we go out, like the disciples now, going out with the sower and with the seeds and all of that, everything that we are doing in there, we know that Jesus can do and his spirit can enact in mighty ways around us to bring good news where there is nothing but bad news all around. But we also realize that there is going to be difficult things that we will encounter, but God will always be with us. So we can go forward and walk. We can go forward and walk. We know it's not going to be perfect every time, and that's okay. That's okay. Even Jesus was in his own community not able to do massive amounts of healings. It's okay if it doesn't work with you, you know? And so you can walk forward knowing that Jesus can still turn bad soil into good. Yeah.
I also look at this as marching orders for discipleship.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and I think in today's society, you know, we can, because I've done it before.
Mm-hmm.
I've tried to go out to talk to people about, some people just don't want to listen to you. They just shut you off. And I said, okay, well, dust the sand off my feet and everything, move on. And I tell that to a lot of different people. I said, yeah, because why do you do this? It says, because all it takes is sometimes you could see 100 people, and all it takes is that one person that latched on.
Mm-hmm. And
that's that lost soul that needed that.
Yeah.
Because remember, Jesus talked about that a couple of times, you know, the woman that lost the penny, and, you know, finding the lost penny. And that's all sometimes it takes us to bring that lost sheep in, even if it's one at a time.
Yeah.
And this is a good practice for us as Christians as we go out, you know, doing discipleship work.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, as you're sent out, you know, that Jesus is turning bad soil into good all around you. And, but also know it's not going to be fruitful every time. It's not going to be fruitful every time. And that's, and being okay with that. Like that's kind of what's kind of going on here. And so that's kind of that section. I mean, did anyone have any other questions or anything like that? I don't really want to go into the next reading yet. Yeah.
Okay, just related to just what we're
Yeah.
talking about. In today's society with COVID,
Yeah.
how do you overcome that when you can't go out and do the kind of thing you would normally do with discipleship?
I think it's always just a challenge like anything else is. Like that's if our way of serving is doing A, B, and C, and then something happens that B can't happen anymore, that doesn't mean that we stop serving. We just change our methods. I also think churches, I got to figure out how I'm going to say this as to not offend. That churches got too big in the soul business. What I mean by that is doing everything they can just for like conversions, like, and that's not even the correct terminology. Doing everything they can for the story of the conversion, where it's like, oh, we just got this one, we could do, because if all the churches were truthful about their conversions they do every year, everyone would be a faithful Christian in the country. And so I kind of take a stance, and it's an odd stance, I realize, but having confidence in the sower, having confidence in what he can do, and having confidence enough that he can help us through it, like all of that, so that we can bring his good news, which the way I define good news is actually good news, that's like you can receive freedom from what's hurting you. So like we're doing that with Alzheimer's daycares here, right? We're doing that over there. We're not, and this is kind of a different way of defining it. We're not making people join a weird Christian statement in order to be in our daycare, because then we're overshadowing the daycare with a little bit of bad news by trying to get a conversion out of it, stuff like that. So I think that's confidence that Jesus will work through our actions as we go forward, spreading his good news to everywhere we go. So when you kind of view that, it's like, okay, I'm spreading good news, and that good news isn't necessarily, it can be, that Jesus died and rose again, those physical words coming out of us, but many times that can be our life. COVID doesn't matter, because we can always find those little paths into people's lives where it matters. I don't know.
Pastor, aren't we doing that with CareNet and
and
all the others?
Yeah, and I think
We're
that
stuck home, but we're still functioning.
yeah. Like I think that's some of it. So we've had to be creative during these times, but that creativity is, we can't just hold back on what it's like, oh, well, I guess we'll do our normal stuff next year. Like that hasn't been our inclination. It's always, this whole year has had to have our ear down. It's like, all right, where do we need to help? And like this last couple weeks, it's been like food bank stuff and food stuff and like all of that stuff. Pete Schultz, he told me, he helps out with Sarah's Kitchen, and his branch of Sarah's Kitchen, he doesn't do the same one that everyone else does here. He says they used to do 100 meals. They did on Wednesdays, every Wednesday. He goes, they're doing 250 right now.
Whoa.
Yeah. And he goes, he goes, when you're doubling, the amount of food that you're sending out and all that, he goes, that's a big change. That's a big change in what's going on. And so, us having, we almost have like a silent hand in all of that, but the amount of good news that's being, expressed in those things. So I think it comes from a confidence that the Lord will lead, in all circumstances, a confidence the Lord will lead, and a willingness to bring good news, even when it may not seem like you get much for it personally. I think when you're doing those two things, I think you'll see fruit. I think you'll see.
He'll turn me on.
I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's the best ministries that I have seen were the ones where I wasn't trying to get someone to do something I wanted them to do. The most growth I've seen in churches has been when I'm not trying to grow the church.
Get to rest.
You know, so I think if you are there fulfilling a need, and here's kind of a culmination, and I could be wrong about this. This is all just like Chris Escher speculation right now. I've talked about this a few times, but the church used to be really respected, right? Like, used to be really respected in culture and all that. And I think some things happened that really has lowered that down. The one that I kind of think, and I could be wrong about this, I need to study it more, and I haven't studied this anymore since the last time I said it. But you look back at all the old hospitals, they were always attached to a church. Like, you got Baptist up in Jacksonville, right? You have in St. Louis, you have Barnes Jewish, you have St. Mary's, you have all the Catholic hospitals. They were all attached to these churches. And I have a feeling what happened in post-war America back in the 50s and 60s, that these churches were dumping lots of money into these hospitals. And there was a church that went, well, if we quit sending all that money in there, we could hire another person. And we could hire this person or that person. We could hire a youth person. And then all of a sudden that happens, and all these youth flock in to the church, and it works. And so these other people see that, and they start pulling their money out, and they start going back in and back in, which all work to boost the church and church attendance and all of these things. But the thing is we lost the heart of who we were in that for growth strategies. And we lost the heart of what we were, and then now we're in a position where those growth strategies don't work anymore, and no one trusts us because they know at the end of the day, we only care about them as much as they care about us. And so we have to do things that in the same spirit of what we used to do with healthcare and all those things. So I believe in that kind of strongly, which is why I'm thrilled about the Alzheimer's daycare. And so I think that was a short-term gain, and we're reaping what we sowed right now. That's an overall pessimistic view. It's not that bad. I'm saying it that extreme for effect. But I think that's some of what has happened. And I think COVID is another example of that, like where the church can be a bastion of hope and protection and safety for people. And I think that's going to be a bell that rings louder 3 years from now than a lot of the churches around here. They're just like, oh, these things are garbage, get away from them, all that stuff. I think the general public is seeing that loud and clear with every time a church makes a big stance on that. So I think the general public is seeing that. And it may be a strategy that works in the short term, but I think in the long term, they'll know that at the end of the day, that the church did something that was difficult so that we could be a little safer. And so that's my strategy. Is it wrong? It could be. It could be. But I have confidence that the Lord will lead. I have confidence that the church already died once and rose again. So if it dies, it'll just rise again. And so we do what we do. We do what we do with good humor, good laughter, good times, and because we're bringing good news. Because that's what I believe the Lord did. I think Jesus was laughing like crazy with his disciples the entire time, until they did something where they wanted to be great or bigger than their britches. And then he's like, get behind me, Satan, like that's, and so that's kind of how I do things. I don't know if that makes any sense. But that's kind of my feeling about things right now. So like with COVID, I think it just means that our individual relationships with people, it just matters more than in the past. And it also means that the church just can't sit back and hope people will come. You know, we've done that for a long time. Or like the big churches where it's like the big children's ministries and all that stuff. Like that stuff's not working right now. Like that's, that stuff's, it's just not there. I think that stuff's effective and it's good, but it's certainly not working right now. So
What is it actually doing? I mean, isn't it just catering to a need at that point, and then
yeah, and that's what we talked about.
it's more an entertainment venue than.
Yeah, and I do a lot that's entertainment too. Like that's like that how I deliver stuff, how I do things. Like I do it so people will listen, so that I can hit them with something big, or something like that. Like that's but I do think, well, before you got on, Lee, we were talking about children and how children are really the thing that we kind of worship in society right now, and you can kind of see that, in how we in how a lot of churches do things. And we may end up doing some of that stuff in the future. It kind of depends if we have a lot of kids around here, like that's, but it's what I think during times of COVID, I think it provides us like, oh, well, we don't have that. The way we did things before, that's not who we are. It's just what we did during that time. And we just adjust and we go, all right, well, we'll do this over here now for a time. Because what we actually are people who know that we are saved and we are okay. We are okay. And we just like to express that good news and safety to people. And so I don't know if any of that makes sense. I need better language for it. To quote another book, it's joining Jesus in what he's doing. And Jesus didn't stop working in this. And that may mean, Gloria, that may mean something different for you than it means for Jack back there. That may, like that may mean for Gloria that it means something with your family kind of directly, with just friend groups around you. Jack, it may mean something different for you. It may mean something for... Oh, that's so good. So Gloria just said, yeah. Yeah, I've never heard that before. So Gloria said, don't be so heavenly minded that you're no earthly good.
Yeah.
That's so good. And like, so if you notice, and we'll be done here in a few minutes, one of the core tenets to my theology is in the Lord's Prayer. It says, Lord, your will be done on earth just as it is in heaven. And everything, it seems like everything in American evangelicalism is trying to get us up into heaven. Everything in first century Christianity, the way I read it, is trying to bring heaven to earth. And even the Lord's Prayer, your will be done on earth just as it is in heaven. And I think if we look at things through that, we will be just factories of good news, because heaven is coming to earth. And that's what Matthew's all about. That's the Christmas story. Emmanuel being here, God with us, all that stuff. Like it's all, heaven is coming to earth. Heaven is coming to earth. And so when you look at the world that way, you're like, oh man, God is already here. God is already there. I don't have to try to get you up there. I just have to try to give you God just for a little bit, So like helping out the homeless guy. You have no idea what impact that'll have 5 days from now, but you just take the stream where it is. You take the stream where it is and give him hope for today, hope for tomorrow. So Yeah, yeah. We'll end right there. That was good. We've had really like weird, interesting opinions with Chris the last 2 weeks. Like that demon possession last week and this week, like how about all the church stuff. Next week we'll be looking at John the Baptist beheading and kind of going forward on that. Another fun section coming up is it chapter 8? Oh, it's after the transfiguration. It's after the transfiguration. Yeah. Transfiguration, kind of, so chapter, it's another big section, kind of like one we just went through, multiple chapters and all that stuff. Begins with the transfiguration and goes all the way through Palm Sunday. So that's the next big section that we'll get into probably after Christmas. But we'll do next week, and then we'll take a few weeks off after that for the Christmas, and I'm not going to be around. Well, I might be around. I'm just not going to hang out with any of you guys. Well, everyone, I'll say a prayer. Jesus, we thank you that you are with us. Continue to open your scriptures to us, that we can see the good news that you have given us. And Lord, help us to express that good news in any creative way possible. Thank you, Jesus. Amen.